All right, today we're going to unpack a really powerful analysis of where India stands right now. It's a country that seems to be wrestling with some deep contradictions. We hear about a booming economy, but at the same time, a lot of people are feeling the pinch. So we're going to explore these paradoxes that paint a fascinating and, yeah, sometimes challenging picture.
The whole analysis really kicks off with this simple but pretty profound piece of advice for the road ahead. Walk cautiously. It just sets this thoughtful tone, right? It's a reminder that under the surface of all the big headlines from this year, there's a much more complex reality that you've got to navigate carefully.
So, to really get what this analysis is about, we first have to understand this central idea the source uses. It's called sleight of hand, or bashigari. Basically, the term is used to describe what's seen as a major gap between the official story we hear and what's actually happening on the ground. This is the lens we're going to be looking through for the rest of our discussion. Okay, so how does this sleight of hand actually play out? Well, the analysis breaks it all down into 5 key areas. We're going to kick things off with the economy and its contradictions, then take a look at a pretty surprising brain and wealth drain. After that, we'll try to untangle this mix of welfare, debt, and public perception before we turn to the changing social fabric, and finally, India's delicate tightrope walk on the world stage. First up, the economy. And right away, we run into a huge paradox. We all hear these stories about a booming, world-leading economy. But the analysis we're looking at asks a really important question. Is that growth actually being felt by the average person?
And wow, this slide really lays out that contrast, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the official narrative. India is the world's 4th largest economy, and it's aiming to be number 3 by 2030. But the source puts that right next to a very different picture on the ground. The claim is that real average income has actually dropped below 2013 levels, and, get this, a staggering 90% of the population earns less than 1 lakh rupees a year. To put that in perspective, that's roughly $1,200.
Now, to keep this whole economic picture looking stable, the source points out that some serious intervention was needed. It mentions that in just 10 months, India's central bank had to sell something like $32 billion from its reserves. And why? Well, to prop up the value of the rupee and stop it from getting any weaker against other currencies. These kinds of economic pressures might also be feeding into our second paradox, what seems to be an exodus of both talent and treasure from the country. This is a trend the source really highlights as a major story of the year. And this slide really captures the two sides of that coin perfectly. The analysis says that India now has the world's largest diaspora, with millions of people looking for opportunities outside the country. But at the exact same time, it points to this parallel exodus of wealth, claiming that about 60% of India's billionaires are now running their operations from other countries.
So with all this capital and talent flowing out, you have to wonder, how is the government managing its own books? And that brings us to our third paradox. This one looks at the really delicate balance between widely celebrated welfare programs, a growing national debt, and the amount of money being spent to shape public perception.
Here we see that dual narrative in action again. On the one hand, there's a government program providing 5 kilograms of free grain to the poor, and it gets a lot of praise. But the source puts that right alongside a different story: India's growing reliance on loans from big international bodies like the IMF and the World Bank just to fund its spending.
And this is where that perception piece of the puzzle comes in. The source actually links this borrowing to a big jump in spending on public relations. It claims the budget for government publicity has been climbing steadily, going from 9.5% in 2023 to a projected 13% in 2025. Of course, these economic paradoxes don't just exist in a bubble. They connect directly to the fourth big theme in this analysis, a real concern that the social fabric of the nation itself is changing, and so is the health of its democratic institutions.
The source argues this shift is happening on 3 connected fronts. First, a rise in what it describes as political hate and hostility. Second, a sense that key democratic pillars, like the Election Commission, are being weakened. And third, an increasing level of control over the stories and narratives we all see in the media.
This is a really powerful question, and it's pulled directly from the source material. It just gets right to the heart of this concern. It asks about India's secular fabric, and that core principle of Sarvdharm Sambhav, which means equal respect for all religions, and it wonders, quite bluntly, why has it disappeared?
Okay, so finally, how does all of this complexity at home translate to the world stage? Well, the source presents India's global position as our fifth and final paradox, a super precarious balancing act, basically walking a diplomatic tightrope between competing world powers.
I mean, just look at this complicated web of alliances.
India is in the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia, but it's also a core member of BRICS with rivals like China and Russia. It's a strategic partner to America, but it's also deeply reliant on Russia for key supplies. It depends on trade with China, while at the same time engaging with opposing powers in the Middle East, like both Iran and Israel. It's a lot.
And all of that leads to the crucial question the source poses. It makes the observation that, while India seems to be with everyone, who is truly with India, especially when it needs allies in its own neighborhood?
And that leaves us with one last really provocative challenge. As we head into a new year, this analysis is basically urging all of us to look past the easy headlines and start asking the tougher questions about the reality they might be hiding. It's a call to see the full picture, with all its paradoxes, its challenges, and all of its complexities.